Okay, we're back, and it's COMP213, Week 10, Lesson 10, Part 4. And we just made this kind of form a little prettier. Again, still not quite happy with where this ends. I'd probably want to put it so that's in line with my, my buttons, right? So I could make these a little bit wider. And I could be specific. Now, here's what happens when I restyle my form, like when it's responsive. Is my form responsive? Nope. Why? Because I've specified a fixed unit measure, right? If I want my form to respond, and what it should do in this scenario here is stack, right? Then I have to use media queries to target what's going to happen to my elements, right? When I move my, my stuff around. Now, for your assignment 4, there is no requirement to create a responsive form, which would make your assignment much more complex, right? Because now, how would you realign stuff inside a form to make it work for mobile, right? But I also don't want you to forget about it, because I think there's some important things here to note, right, about what to do with this form, right? So we're not going to focus today on making responsive forms, so I'm going to leave that for you. We're not going to do it. It's another topic, but I do want to make these elements here, if you notice here, this element here, I want it to take up a certain space. And again, I can do it with M's, right? So we want to go back to our styling for our text input, and that's our input styling. I've made it so that the minimum width is 6 M's. I could increase this to 8 M's to see what it does. It might be 8 or 10. Let's take a look and see what that does, right? So that's not what I wanted, right? Because that just makes everything big, right? So let's undo that one. So this is our inputs. It's back to 6 M's, right? Our input types for buttons and so on, minimum width is 6 M's. I could do that. I could say, what if I made it minimum width of 10 M's, right? So it's going to change our button size too, watch. So here's this minimum width and then 10 M's. But hold on, this changed, but these didn't change. How come? These are inputs. These are text inputs. How come the minimum width of these ones didn't change? I mean, I'm specifying a width modifier for inputs, right? So what if I wanted to target? So I said, you know, all inputs, my width doesn't really work, so I want to specify a minimum width of 6 M's or something like that for type. Here's specific. It's going to be specific. Type is equal to text. So text, and for type input forms where type would equal to password, those two input type elements, if you will. I want a minimum width. Let's get this rid of this. Here's my minimum width of 6 M's. Right, minimum width of 6 M's for those things. Let's see what happens to my buttons now. Really small buttons, right? And if you notice, you know, this is like what happens here. So it doesn't really specify. This is what 6 M's looks like. It's pretty small, right? Still not really affecting this. I'm just specifying. I'm showing you what these things do, right? Because we're trying to target stuff. So I definitely want this, right? This thing here. I want this, right, back up here. So I definitely want minimum width here, so it affects all text. But maybe only for text input, I want my minimum width. Can I do this? Or maybe I can set a width, right? So minimum width of, instead of 6 M's, you know, or 300 pixels, I could put those things as well. Let's make it so it's 20 M's. Let's see what that does. Something really extreme, right? So let's see if that affects my input type text and input type password, and tell me why it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, why? Okay, that worked. Kind of made them really large, right? See how that's 20 M's. So that's cool, right? That worked out for me, right? But still, it didn't. Kind of didn't do what I wanted it to do, right? And also, you know what? This height here, this line height, is definitely what I want to affect, because it doesn't work quite nicely like how I'd like. So 20 M's definitely not. Maybe 10 M's would be probably too much. And how am I figuring this stuff out anyway? And well, look, I have my total width for my form of 25 M's, right? Which means that my stuff is going to hug into that 25 M's. I'm saying my minimum input is 6, right? And my label, if I'm not wrong, Where's my label? I think it's down here somewhere. My label is 6. So 6, and let's say 12 is 18, plus a bit of padding and so on, would give me almost 25. Let's see how that works. So, yeah, still not quite where I want it for 12. That's 12. Okay, and I want you to tell me what I could do differently, okay? See if you can figure this out. So there's 14. Let's take a look at this, the length of this thing for a second. 14. I'm going to keep doing this until we get to the point where you go, stop. I could do that too. Right? Almost. And here's, that's 16. Let's try 18 element. 18. And I'm just creeping along that way, right? Oh. I knew that was going to happen. So it looks like it's going to be something like 17 something. So I want to be really specific. I want to try and match this up. Let's try 17. Yeah, it's almost the same. Right? It's almost like line. There's a bit of margin between the end or whatever, but now it looks a little better. If I want these elements to be thicker, what could I do? Right? If you notice, my text is floating right in the middle. That's where it's going right now. But my text is small. So I could say, well, we enter form elements in there. I want my same style for my username and password and my text to be in there as well. Right? So I could put in a text. I put 1.2 M's for everything as well for my inputs. But I could do that not just for here, because you know what? I've also put in a 1.2 M for my form buttons and a 1.3 M line height. I might as well put that in. Just take this out here, take this out, and put that in on my inputs themselves. So all inputs, as an example, they're all font size 1.2, and they're all line height of 1.3. Now this has an effect that maybe I don't want, and we'll see what I'm talking about in a second. It does this. Now, this is good, but what's happened is I've got more spacing in here for my characters, and it's hugging my line to make it even bigger. So that's why it's pushed it down to the next level. So let's go and try that again. So now my 17, because I've made my objects larger, has to shrink down a little bit, as you'll see. And this is where, it's not necessarily trial and error, right? It's just you have to make adjustments to your style, right, according to the size of the font that you have in your buttons and in your text. And I'm doing it slowly for you so you can understand the effects of everything in here, as opposed to me just giving you a value and saying, here, do this, try this value, right? Because the value really doesn't impact. I'm going to go to 12 and see if that's too much. No, even more. And then there's a reason for why this happens, why we've lost so much in terms of size, because our buttons, our whole font is bigger, right? Which is preventing, is that 10? Did I save that? Yeah. Which is preventing us from doing what I want to do. And why? Because our M's are bigger. My total M's, right, the number of M's I have, are bigger for what I'm doing, right? So here's my input. My font size is 8 M's, but my minimum width is 6 M's, right? So this is my control. This is my minimum width for my password type. My whole box is this size, but my input says my minimum width is 6 M's. So it's going to keep that in line. So if I get rid of this now, this whole line of 8 M's, and go back to here, right, then you notice that this is the minimum width. And the reason for this is because the size of our box, this form itself, isn't large enough now to contain the size that I'm asking for it to be. Right? So it's pressing in, because if you actually take this form from here to here and measure it, and then you add padding and margin and put it from here to here, it gives me a bit of a break. And that's where I may have to increase my form size. So let's increase my form size to 30, just for a second, 30 M's, and then we'll go back down. We'll keep shrinking it down until when we get for it to look nice. Okay. So definitely want less than 30. So this is going to push these buttons to the left a little bit, right? So 30 is too big. Let's specify. So 6 M's is correct now. I don't have to specify size type anymore, right? Because they're the same. And I go back to 28. Right? Keep pulling back and back and back until I get the look and feel that I'm looking for. Not quite. Let's go 26. And then, you know, there's a total calculated height that I can show you on your, when you inspect your stuff. That's better. And that's what I wanted. So I've got big elements, but here's a problem that I have too, right? I have my password that floats up here, and I got my username and stuff down here, right? I got the same line heights, right? But it looks like a little bit offset. How come it's offset? Anybody? Come on, guys. I want you to think about the box model a little bit, all right? I've got a border. This border adds to the width of my box model. So if I want this stuff to be pushed down by 1 pixel, I've got to push them down from the top by 1 pixel, which means because I've got a border. And the easy way to do this, to align things properly, is to make an invisible border 1 pixel with a color that's transparent. All right, so let's try this out. So I know that this has a border about 1 pixel, and to show you this, let's put the border in there and make it this, you know, kind of this slight color, right? All right, so let's go to our input, and I go to border, and I'll say 1 pixel, and I'll say black, a solid black. Okay, just to see what that looks like for a second, right? And then see if you arrange. Arranges first of all. Well, that's not what I wanted. I did it on the wrong thing. I did it on the inputs, didn't I? I meant to do it on the form element, the my label, which is down here. But see what it did? It changed my border to a different color, right? Colon is important too, huh? Otherwise, we're going to have some issues, right? Okay. Now take a look. Now they're more centered, right? Now, if you notice, there is a slight difference between the label, and my element, right? Because I styled my element slightly differently, right? And you know, part of this is my fault because I got my label way down here. This is where it's important to organize yourself, right? And here's my main form. I want to kind of grab my label and bring it up to where I'm actually dealing with other elements that are similar. So here's my input, and I got my label. Maybe I'll put my label above here to kind of keep it in line, right? And now let's take a look at the difference between my label and my input. My padding here is 5 pixels. My padding here is 5 pixels. Those are the same. My width is 6 ems. My minimum width is 6 ems. That's something I got to think about. If I put minimum width, by the way, I have a specifier for my labels so that they're aligned the same. Font size 1.2, font size 1.3. In fact, everything is identical, right? Is identical, but I got still a bit of some spacing between everything else. And part of that is because the way inputs are seen compared to labels. Even if I put a border of 1 pixel black and I put all this other stuff in here to really match it up, right? Because I've got a bit of a different size, and to match up my border and so on. Even though I've got the exact same stuff, I got to mash this up a little bit and make a difference. So some people, this is why they don't like using label as opposed to a text box that is something that you can't touch. I can reform I can create my own label style, call it label. Really, it's not a label, it's a text box, and they fully align next to each other, and they're just read-only. You can't actually put anything in there. And you have a value for the text box, and it looks like a label, but it's actually a text box. All right? There is nothing else you can do here. Also, float left puts them in a certain position, and so it offsets some of that issue. And you notice that inside my pattern, that also has an effect of what it does, float left. Right? So let's put this, it's still better. So if I go, I only care about my top left anyway. So if I put border 1 pixel solid, but instead of black, I put transparent. Can I do that? Well, does it give me the option? Look at what it gives me here. It doesn't give me the option of transparent here. But what it does, if I go back to my label, so this is what it looks like now, and if I refresh, it doesn't move, but it does align a little nicer, right? A little closer to what it looks like. It's not floating too high. If I really want to offset it you know, by hand, right? And then here's my label. What I want to do is create almost like this padding top that's a little bit different, as an example, from my padding left and right. Right? So, and even from my bottom. I don't want my bottom padding to be different. So what I might want to do is something like this. I specify more details here. So my padding top, instead of 5 pixels, is like 7 pixels. And my padding left is 5 pixels, and my padding to the bottom is also 5 pixels, and my padding to the left is 5 pixels. So 5, 5. So a different specifier for my top left and right. And that might also drag this label a little down. See, that's a little bit better than where it is. So again, I'm really positioning stuff so my labels and my objects look a little nicer, a little bit closer. And we can keep going here, but we're going to waste a lot of time doing this stuff as opposed to talking about other form elements that you need for your assignment number 4. Let's just talk about those things. So we talked form and input. Text area is where we add some additional styling. We want this select tag, which looks to be like a drop-down list. That's one, if you want a drop-down list. And the other one is this option tag. This is the one that we really want to focus on, right? So if I want to go to the option tag and I want to know what they do, again, I'm going to go to W3 Schools without looking at the PowerPoint. And I'm going to go in here and say search for option tag. And my option tag is an HTML option tag. Here it is, and this is what it would look like. So my option is this is a drop-down list example, right? So Volvo, Saab, Opel, Audi, right? This is the kind of stuff that it looks like, right? So option is one, and they have different attributes: disabled, label. I can set up a label for my option, my selected, if it's selected or not, and the value that it has, right? So I can have options for that. And the other one that I want to hit is my select tag. So select tag, right? So select tag in my HTML. And if you notice, it's very similar to my option tag. Here's my select. My select is what surrounds my option. This is like my drop-down container. And these are the options inside my container. That's what it does. So select itself is the element that's used to create a drop-down list. My option are the options that are inside. Okay, that's what they are. So that's what select and options are. Okay, let's continue down the hole here. So examples of forms. We talked about actions, methods, name, and ID for the form itself. We talked about those at length. We kind of went through this. Again, some stuff here I discussed. Required and placeholder. You know what? I go back to my HTML document for a second. And if you notice here in my index, right, I've got a placeholder for my my username. But if I want to say that it's required, I can do that. I can say required. And this is an HTML validator, right, that I put in there. And I can also say, you know what, not only my username is required, because I need both my username and my password is required. So they're both required as elements before I kick them off. So if I go back here and refresh, and if I try and log in now, right, I don't get any kind of feedback because two things happen. One is I don't have an error specifier. So what happens when I don't put anything that's invalid, an invalid input as an example, right? And the other reason is because my form button type is of type button. If I make this a submit, let's see what it does. It gives me more. It's giving me errors now, but at least it'll show you the difference. So here's my login button. And if you notice, it says, please fill in this field. Take a look. That's built in, right, to HTML5. Look. Ooh, please fill in this field, right? It's required, right? So it won't allow me to go until I do both, Tom and then my password. If I go log in again, it'll say, please fill in this field, right? That's a default. That's what it does by default when I put required, right? Here's the other thing. If I want my username, again, to have focus, right? So I can set this autofocus on, right? Here's my autofocus. Yeah.
Can you give a specific message?
I could. But let's just keep going here for a second. And I could say that my autocomplete, right? Autocomplete is off. I don't want my in this particular form for my username and password, just from a safety perspective, I don't want any time for this stuff to be on. Now, typically, autocomplete's automatically off for password, but I want to specify that it automatically works that way. So let's take a look and see what it does now, right? And refresh. So now I go Tom and my password, and then when I press this, it's going to give me an error, right? It's going to say it's going to reflect my password up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? All right, but look what it does here. It wipes this stuff out. Now if I type in Tom again, it doesn't give me my autocomplete at all because I've turned autocomplete off, which you should probably do for username and password from a security standpoint. Okay, So that's what we kind of dealt with that one. And here's examples of passwords and what they do. Passwords are hidden. This is one that I need, is a different input element which is a checkbox. And if I want a checkbox looks like this. You may need this for your forms. And it's a little different than the two that you need actually is checkbox and radio. These two buttons. Checkbox allows you to create multiple items, select multiple items here. And there's a bit of a difference between type is equal to checkbox and type is equal to radio. And the best place to look at that again is, I like going back to this specifier here. So if I go, input tag for number 3 schools, here's my input tag. And if I look at my type specifiers, there's different ones. If I go type, and then type, there's ones that say type is a checkbox, right? Here's my checkbox. So I'm going to search for that again. So input type checkbox. And if I look through that, right? There's the checked attribute. That's not really what I wanted, right? Because that just tells me that HTML input tag is what I want to look at, which is what we just saw in this big list here, right? Except checked. That's one of the ones I want. Whether it's checked or not, you can set it aside as an option, and there's different types. But how do I mash it up so that way when I want forms and input checkbox object, HTML DOM, forms with checkboxes, right? And input type is equal to checkbox. This is probably what I want. And here's an example of how this works. I have an input type checkbox. My name for each of these input types is the same. Take a look. Vehicle, vehicle, vehicle. My value, though, is different. Bike, car, boat. Bike, car, boat. And then it says I have a bike, I have a car, I have a boat. But the name attribute here, which is the name of these items here, are the same. Also, you know what? I'd probably want to add an ID here if I want to specifically target those things from an input perspective. But the name is very, very important. The name value, the name object, or the name attribute here for my checkbox to make them all the same, because see, I can check each individual one or have them all checked. As an example, I can check each one separately. That's different. And again, this is we're just using a kind of a little sandbox here that they give us to use. If I change the name, the type, instead of checkbox, if I go radio, right? So this is just default styling here. I'm just going to copy this and paste this to radio, right? So radio, radio. I'll leave my submit as the same way. And I see the name is the same. For name, 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 right? And if I see the result of that, I have radio buttons now. And if you notice, I can only click one of them, right? The only reason why I click one of them is because my name value is the same, right? My name is vehicle, right? I have a bike, I have a car. If I change my name value for the last one, instead of vehicle to avatar, something else, right? I'm just making this up, and I go receive result. Now what I can do is I can do one of these two plus this one, right? Because it's different than these two things. So the name attribute separates my radio buttons. Let's try this in a bigger example. So an example is username and password, right? And when the person logs in, we're going to make another link. So when the person logs in, he's logged in now, right? It's going to take you to this other link, which is, as an example, I don't know, kind of a dashboard section, right? Okay, so let's change this thing to dashboard. So we're going to go back to our navigation. Here's our navigation. Link number 2 now, we're going to make link number 2 dashboard. We're going to get to there. Here's my link number 2. And when I go to dashboard, I want it to look exactly like my login screen, except for a couple things. I'm going to stop debugging here for a second. And I'm going to go into my Solution Explorer. And now if you notice, I only have one form. It's index, or a page, index.html. I'm going to copy this thing, right? And I'm going to paste this thing back in, right? So here's paste. Remember I did this last time. So here's my copy. I'm going to just call this dashboard, just because, you know, we can have a bunch of different controls here. For my dashboard, it's identical to my index, right? But the only thing is I want my active link now to show, here's my active, so I'm going to kind of kill this and put it on my dashboard. So my dashboard's now active. That's my active link, right? When we go to my dashboard. I also want my title, like my title of each of my objects. So this is COMP213 dashboard. Maybe put that in there. So we head to our dashboard, it looks different. Here's my header section. Instead of my forms example, and we're going to say this, this will be a forms example that has examples for, instead of forms, like for my login, username, and password, this will be for radio buttons, radio and check buttons, radio and check boxes, right? That's what this will do, radio and check boxes. And for my index.html, it'll be a form example that's just for, instead of username and password, sorry, this is a username and password example, how we'd make a username or login form, if you will, right? And now let's run this thing and see what happens, right? So if I go to dashboard, it's there. Oh yeah, maybe the link would be good. How about that? Index can't just go to this, it's got to go to dashboard. So I'm going to go to, let's type in dashboard.html. And of course, I've got to do the same thing with my dashboard. My dashboard's actually got to go somewhere. Like for example, link 2 has to go to dashboard just because I have a dashboard right now. And link 1 should go to index because that's got to be where my home is, right? So index.html. And I got to do the same thing with my index.html over here because I didn't specify. Okay. Oh, that'd be good if I actually type in the whole word with that. Okay, and then we'll rerun this thing and see what happens. Okay, so we run it, and now I go to my dashboard, and I have, it looks exactly the same, but it says radio and checkboxes up here. I go home, it has my username and password. That's the two things it does. So they maintain focus. That's what these things do. I definitely want to take away, what about if I log in, right? That's going to tell me I need to log in, and when I log in, it takes me to my dashboard. Okay, can I do that with my form? Even though it's silly. It's a silly little form. So I go index, and there's no control, but you know what? I want my form action, instead of it going to pound, I want my form action to go to my dashboard.html. So let's see if that works. So here's my dashboard.html for my index, and let's refresh. Right, so here I am at home. I enter my username and password. Just to, imagine this is like your login form, and then I log in, and then it takes me to my dashboard. See how it moved control from one form to the other? You can do that with buttons, no problem. It's almost like using it as a link, right? Okay, and we're kind of making it so that there's no way of knowing that I'm logged in right now because we don't have any kind of, there's no back end to this thing. This is just an empty front end form. Okay, so cool. So this is my dashboard I want to change. I want to get rid of all these things here, but I don't want to get rid of my form group because these form groups are something that I want to have in, right? So let's say, for example, I want to keep my submit buttons and everything else. That's cool. But I want my form group, instead of it going to, well, this one for my dashboard, this is the one I want to change. I don't want my form group to do anything. But I also want, if you notice here, my form group, my buttons stay the same. But these ones I want gone. So I want my label to be there, right? And I want this label to be here as well, right? So here's my label, right? But instead of these input boxes to be these other inputs, I'm going to go input. Let's check this out. See if I can go do this. And I'm going to say type is equal to radio, right? So here's my radio. Name, right? We're going to say, so we want to decide whether you're male or female, right? So we're going to say gender, male or female. Because you're kind of entering a form for this is your profile, if you will, right? Maybe that's a better name for this form than dashboard. But anyways, let's leave it at that. And let's say I want to also give an ID of, my ID should be the same thing. So instead of my input being, just radio, I want to call this ID male, right? And my value would be what's in there. So that's male. All right, so that's one of them. And you know what? In the same form, but instead of this saying username, it's going to say gender, right? And I want to say this is my label for my gender, right? It's my label for my gender. Let's see if we can do this thing. And then my input, here's my input. I want to add another input in here that has, we're going to see the problems that's going to come in. Here's female. Right, so, and this will be, of course, female. So male or female. And we'll kill this form group because we don't need this right now. Let's see what happens to this. All right, and when we refresh my dashboard, I've got gender, and I have there's nothing there. There's no male or female. How come? How come? How come? And I got my login, reset login. I don't need those two things. Let's go back. So instead of my reset and login, I'll have my submit. It'll say submit. That makes sense. That's my changes, or save. Maybe save. Right, and maybe my reset will say cancel. Here's my cancel, and this will be, instead of my login button, this will be my save button. Save button. And this will be my cancel button. Right? Now they still have a class of form button. That's why they're getting the shape that they're getting. Right? This is male and female. Here's my value, and my ID is male and female. My name is that, but hey, where's my how come it doesn't say male and female? Well, if you notice over here in the options, I got name, I got value, and then I've got some kind of value afterwards that says male or female. I've got to put those in there. I could, right? Because I have gender as part of my label, right? I could put in here something like male or female with a label. I could say my label is male or female, or you can just put in male and female. I could do that. That's my options. These are male option and female options here. And when I refresh, it looks like this. Well, man, what happened? How come my male and female are all messed up like that? Because I got no styling. That's why I've got not this. This is happening. If you look at the example, it's exactly what I've done, male and female, right? With breaks, line breaks at the end. So I can do one of these, right? Male, female. But this goes against what I want to do. I don't want to use line breaks because it's not semantically correct to do this, right? Let's go back. So male and female. And if you notice, wait, did I save it? Yeah. I got my line breaks, right? But when I refresh this, right, I don't have male and female. It's like way up here, and it's down here, right? And I can save and cancel, but it doesn't really do much of anything right now. Take a look. It's like way off. How come? Well, I could put in, I could, right? Instead of this, put in a label, right? A label. And inside my label, I could have male, right? And I could put in a label here, right? Look what I put in my label, right? Label, female. Could put those labels in there. Right, let's see what that looks like. Neat, but not what I wanted. That's male, and that's female, right? And the reason for this is because my checkboxes, as an example, a couple of things that I want them to do. If I want them to be vertical groups, like up and down, right? I may want my checkboxes here because I'm targeting a checkbox and not an input type that's of a text box to be on the same line. So instead of it being display block, I want it maybe to display inline block. So let's try that. So I go target it with CSS. So here's my input, but I want to specify a type. So I want to say input with type is equal to radio, right? As an example, or that's what I want. And then I want the display to be inline block. Oh, inline block. Right? See what that does. So I'm specifying radio buttons. They're going to display inline block. Let's see what that does. So that's good. That's what I wanted. But now my female is way down here. My male is up here. And how come it's doing that? Well, it's this gender doing over here. How come this is over here and these are over here? And how come? Well, there's a couple things. I mentioned them label. I mentioned that they're labels. And if you remember what I did with my home button, my labels have a specific minimum width of 6 ems. Right? So here's my 6 ems here, and there's 6 ems over here. And I don't want this 6 ems just for my for these radio buttons labels, as an example. And I haven't really specified the size of these things. I haven't done anything. So how do I style labels now that are only for radio buttons? Well, I have to create another class, right? So this is my generic label, and now I want to make a label for radio buttons because that label is a different kind of label. So I'm going to make another class. It's my form group. I might as well make it near label because you know what? It's going to be for labels that are radio buttons, right? Or could I not choose some kind of label, right, with a for, right? I could choose a label that's a for that's pointing to a specific item, right? So if I want to specifically look at labels for this set of radio buttons with a for of gender, if I want to specify that, I want to put a box, just a test. I want to put a border of 1 pixel dashed red. Oops. Just about the border, so I can specify. If I can see if I can target my label of that's a gender, right? Let's see what that does. So, oh no, this is the label for gender. You see? So I want to specify my label for male and for female. I want to target those. This is my label. This is what it looks like for gender. Right? And now let's specify a label for male. And I don't have a label for male because I haven't specified that in my index.html, right? Sorry, my dashboard.html. I didn't specify that this label is for male. So I go for is equal male, right? And then this one is for equals to female, right? So labels for male, labels for female. And now let's see what it does. So if I specify that and refresh, hey, how come? How come? Well, oh yeah, that should have worked. And go back into here to my index.html or my dashboard.html and refresh. Now I got my label. Well, look at all this space here. Look at this space I'm getting here. Man, I've got like this crazy amount of space for this thing. Well, because I haven't specified for my this input box, which are type radio, that I don't want so much space for my stuff. This is a minimum size here that I'm going here, right, with. And the same thing goes with female. This is good, but I want these ones to be over here, right? And I want my labels for radio button to be aligned to the right, right? So this is where I can do that. I can go in here to my main CSS, and for my label, I know that for anything for male, well, you know what? My label also, that's only for female, so specific labels for female, instead of making my own class, right? These two labels for male and for female, I want to put borders around them for now. I want them to text align right, right? That's what I want for sure. Text align, I'll be okay. Text align right, I'll be all right. I want them to text align right. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. I want these things, these objects, these checkboxes, right? I want to specify here in the type of radio. They're inline block. That's good. But I also need them because they're all these inputs. Like the minimum width is 6 That can't be. So I'm going to say the minimum width, or I won't put a minimum width. Minimum width, I'm going to put it as 1 right? To specify, you know, I'm overriding this one. Right? The input for general inputs are 6 but for radio buttons they're going to be 1 right? So I'm overriding that input and refresh, right? That's good. Now they're inline block, which makes them inline, right? I did want to make them block because that'll put them back. So this inline block can disappear. So that was causing what my issue was. Now that I'm doing my troubleshooting, I can figure that out, right? And oh wow, what's happening here? Because this one is aligning to the right, right? Because guess what? My labels up here float to the left, right? And I want my label to float to the right only for labels that are for male and for female. So float to the right. I might have to clear float too. I might have to clear my float for some of these things. Yeah, I got a problem with my float because it's putting myself out of these boxes, right? See what's happening is they're inside the boxes for male, and for male is up here, but it's flowing to the right. And if you notice, the space for my label, for my checkbox, is flowing to the left, right? And that's what's happening for my two things. And I'm running out of time with you guys. But this is what the kind of stuff you have to kind of figure out. So if I float to the right, which is right, let's go back to that. Float to the right. I want this to float to the right over here as well, but I want it to be on the next line, right? So maybe what I do is if I say float none, or I want to clear for my labels instead of float none, I want to say it might be when I'll say clear both. So I want to clear float left and right, just in case. See what that does. So there's okay. So this is what this does, and now these have to be in line with these ones. But you see how small these are? They're right on top of each other, and I want to give some space around my radio buttons, right? Because that's a little different thing. How do I do that? Well, remember that my inputs that my padding is 5 pixels all the way around, right? But what I need, because these inputs don't have padding, there's nothing inside the radio button. You can't put a value inside the radio button. They need margin, right? So specifically for radio buttons themselves, I need a margin all the way around, let's say, of at least 5 pixels. Let's say 5 pixels. See what happens there, right? Might have to be more. Or maybe even, I'll have to say this, I might specify a line height here as well. That might also work for radio buttons. Let's take a look and refresh, right? So there's some space between them, but not a lot, right? And that's margin all the way around. If I specify line height, let's see if line height will work for me, as 1.3 ems, because that's the size of my object, right? Let's see what it does for me now. Nothing. And what if I want to specify the size of my radio button? So if I go size, right, resize or tab size or font size, that's all I can do. So if I say font size of 1.2 em, if I don't have a font size for radio buttons, how do I make them bigger? No difference, right? So they're not any bigger. So what if I want to make these radio buttons? These radio buttons are working, right? But I want to make them so that they're bigger. Now right now my male and my female buttons are there, but how do I do this so I can target them to be bigger? So we're out of time. I'm going to show you guys next time we get together on Monday. We'll get together and show you that I believe your assignment's due next week, right? So you have lots of time. We're going to continue talking about forms a little bit as we move into the next topic. All right? So let's leave it at that for now, and then we'll fix it as we get closer.